The Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, is in the studio in Canberra. Prime Minister, good morning.
Good morning, Alan.
Prime Minister, look, can I just make a minor point? I've got my job to do, you've got your job to do. Your people rang here yesterday. It was agreed this interview would take place at 7:10. We accommodated that and cancelled someone who was to be here, who'd made very significant personal arrangements as well. 7:10 is 7:10, isn't it?
Well, I'm sorry about that, Alan, but I've been delayed on another interview.
Yes, but I mean, this is what your staff... We have made many requests for you to be on this program. None of those requests have ever been acknowledged. I can understand you may not want to come on or you can't come on, but surely courtesy has to be part of the way in which the public are treated.
Alan, I believe I am a very courteous person.
Well,
I'm also a very
Julia.
busy... if I can finish my sentence, Alan. I'm also a very busy person. And, Alan, if I can finish my sentence uninterrupted, I've had media commitments this morning.
You had a media commitment this morning at 7:10, which your staff agreed on this program.
Well, Alan,
Anyway,
I am happy to apologise to you for being late.
Right.
I am now here. If you have
good.
a question in the nation's interest, then please feel free to put it.
Thank you. I've got several.
Right.
Do you understand that there is white-hot anger out there, and there was yesterday, and there will continue to be, because 5 days before the August 21 poll, you said there will be no carbon tax under the government I lead. I mean, this is what you've said.
There will be no carbon tax under the government I lead.
And then, in case there was any doubt, you repeated the line in the Australian newspaper the day before the election. You said, I rule out a carbon tax.
Well, Alan, let me answer that. In the last election campaign, I talked consistently about how climate change was real, it was caused by human activity, that we needed to cut down on carbon pollution, and that the best way of doing that was to price carbon through a market-based mechanism, and that's what I announced yesterday.
Julia, you didn't say
when I announced that yesterday, Alan, I announced that there would be a fixed price for the first few years, and rather than play any semantic word games, that is a market-based mechanism, but rather than play any semantic word games, I was frank enough with the Australian people to say that that first few years would work effectively like a tax.
Right, now, Julia,
I know, and if we're going to go through history, let's just be really clear about the history. I know that you speak to Tony Abbott regularly on this show and you listen to what he has to say.
Well, you're welcome anytime.
Alan, let me remind you of what he's had to say. He's had to say about carbon pricing, and I'm reading from a sheet here, why not just do it with a simple tax? He's actually said the simplest way to price carbon is by putting a fixed price on it.
He went to the election, Julia, saying quite clearly there will be no carbon tax. You said in 2009 on the ABC, I think when you go to an election and you give a promise to the Australian people, you should do everything in your power to honour that promise. Now, your Deputy Prime Minister, who became the Deputy when Kevin Rudd left, your Deputy Prime Minister said this also to the nation during the election and prior to the date of the vote.
Now, it's not possible that we're bringing in a carbon tax. That is a hysterically inaccurate claim being made by the coalition.
Do you understand, Julia, that you are the issue today? Because there are people now saying your name is not Julia, but Julia. And they are saying that we've got a liar running the country. Just listen to Brad here, who rang this morning. Julia, the lines were on fire, believe me, about this. And this is what Brad said.
I felt sick in the stomach. I feel like I could cry. How much of this raping have we got to tolerate from this government? The wastage, the pink bats, the school halls, the bloody internet thing, and now this. I feel sick throwing out a carton of milk that goes out of date. These people can throw out billions and billions of dollars without giving us stuff. How hard it is to earn money every day. I've been up since 3 o'clock this morning trying to earn money for these clowns to plead up against the war. Alan, I've had enough. How do we organise a march or a petition? This has to stop.
Do you understand those sentiments?
I understand people work incredibly hard, Alan, and I understand people worry a great deal about making ends meet. And that's why on your show I can say that I'm determined to price carbon. I believe Australians agree that climate change is real and it's the right thing to do to have a clean energy future for this country with all of the jobs that go with it, that people don't want Australia left behind and losing those jobs in the future.
Left behind whom?
But I understand, Alan, if I can just finish, I understand people will think about how is this going to impact me, and what I can say to them is that the single biggest use of money from the money raised by pricing carbon will be to assist households with cost of living. And I can also say to people like Brad, any dollar figure he has seen referred to in today's newspapers suggesting a particular family would pay a specific dollar cost is a misleading figure. We haven't determined the price yet, and households will get assistance with the cost of living.
See, that's because you haven't determined the price, because Christine Milne said yesterday it's happening because we have shared power in Australia. Senator Brown was at least honest enough to say that this will rise every year. How can you, as the price... See, you just said before, we don't want to get left behind. Who are we being left behind? America?
Europe? The world is moving, Alan. There are more than 30 countries with emissions trading schemes and 10 American states with emissions trading schemes. The world is moving. Now, I don't believe Australia has to move in front of the world, but I also don't believe we can afford to be left behind. We are very big emitters of carbon pollution per head of population, one of the biggest emitters in the world. That means if we don't change as the world moves, we could get stuck with an old-fashioned high-carbon pollution economy and not have the jobs of the future. I am not, Alan, going to put the nation in that position. Pricing carbon is the right thing to do, and I said that during the election campaign.
No, you did not.
Yes, I did, Alan.
Julia, you gave a policy speech.
Get all of the statements out, Alan, and you will see during the election campaign. I said climate change is real. I said we needed to address it, that pricing carbon is the most efficient way to do it. That is what happened during the election campaign.
PM, this is untruthful. You launched...
That is,
listen,
Alan,
launched the campaign.
My statements.
PM, you launched the ALP campaign. You uttered 5,400 words in that speech to the ALP faithful when you launched the campaign. You did not mention carbon tax, and you had one sentence on climate change. That's your prospectus.
Alan,
that's your prospectus to the people.
Are you suggesting in a 35-day campaign the only speech I ever made, the only statement that ever came out of my mouth was on the day of the ALP campaign?
But at the launch you weren't going to say it.
How ridiculous, Alan, and how calculated to mislead your listeners. I am asking you to look at all of the statements I made in the election
You said specifically
campaign.
there will be
Alan,
no carbon tax under the government I lead.
After the 3 years that have just been in Australian politics, seriously say
Julia,
that the Labor Party was not committed to pricing carbon and dealing with climate change.
You weren't prepared to say that in the policy speech because you knew it would alienate a major constituency that you wanted to support, namely the working families. You knew they'd be alienated and you left it out. Now,
and what I can say to those working families, Alan, is the carbon price mechanism I announced yesterday will assist households with cost of living pressures. Obviously, I understand there are many households that really struggle to make ends meet, many families that do it tough, and for those families we will be providing assistance. No one should be fooled by any of the dollar figures in today's newspapers. Those figures are not based on any known facts. We will price carbon, we'll have a specific price, and we will have an assistance package to help Australians under cost of living pressure.
How can you say to the Australian people that this will cut our emissions of carbon dioxide when you're pocketing, because you represent us, the government, billions of dollars from selling coal and iron ore to China and the rest of Asia? Surely this is hypocrisy and deceit rolled into one, isn't it?
We're a resource-rich economy, Alan. We're going to use those resources and we're going to export them around the world. Correct. That creates jobs. That creates
helping China.
That's good for Australia.
Helping China
what is
double or
also
triple
good
its
for
emissions.
Australia's future is to move to a clean energy, low pollution economy. That means Australian jobs too. What's the theme here, Alan? Australian jobs. I want Australian people to have the benefits and dignity of work with everything that gives them in terms of supporting their families. I want this nation to have jobs. That's why I believe in a clean energy future. That's why we can't afford to risk to being left behind as the world moves, and the world is moving on climate change.
Well, Barack Obama's doing nothing on climate change.
That's completely untrue, Alan.
But let me just come to the jobs business.
You should look at Barack Obama's State of the Union address, and that statement you've just made to your listeners, Alan, is not true.
Every business person, not every business person, significant business people. Last year, the Reserve Bank board member Dick Warburton said Australia had to follow Mr Obama's lead and investigate other ways to cut carbon emissions. He said we'd be stupid to introduce a carbon price without the United States. Now, Alan Joyce, the chief executive of Qantas, said at the end of last year against a carbon tax, we're one of the biggest users of fuel, and where I think the carbon tax is going to be important to us is to make sure that Australia doesn't go on its own and applies a tax that causes distortion to competition and ends up with wrong outcomes for both the environment and business. He said, we spend $3.5 billion on aviation fuel a year, so the potential for us to move to sustainable fuel is huge. What we need is not a penal tax, but to try and encourage people to move in a direction and help people who've made the commitment to move in a direction to actually get there with the right investment.
Okay, Alan, and I would hope that over the next few days when you're broadcasting, you'll get out the statements of the Business Council of Australia that talk about the importance of tackling climate change and the importance to business of the certainty of knowing what the price on carbon is. I hope you get out the reports of the Australian industry group that says the same thing. I hope you get out the statements of many leading Australian business people that say we do need to tackle climate change, we do need to price
Is Dick
carbon.
Warburton a leading business person?
And it is preventing investment that we do not have a price on carbon now. It is certainly preventing investment in electricity generation. So if you want to give your listeners, Alan, and it's right for you to do so, a representative selection of the views of business, then go right across the board. The biggest business organisations in this country have said consistently to government, we need the certainty of knowing what a carbon price is.
Prime Minister, you can give the certainty to the business community, and I've said this over and over again, by saying there'll be no carbon tax, which